talking about another important concept of English and a bit confusing concept, which is clauses. Now, clause is basically a group of words which contain a subject and a predicate along with a finite verb. So first, let us just begin with the definition of clause. The definition is that it is a group of words that contain a subject and a predicate along with the finite verb. It contains a subject, it contains a predicate and a finite verb. Now next we are going to discuss the type of clauses. So next topic is type of clauses. The first and the most important type of clause is the main clause. The second type of clause is subordinate clause. The third type of clause is adjective clause. Fourth type of clause is adverb clause. And the fifth type of clause is my noun clause. So there are 5 types of clauses: my main clause, subordinate clause, adjective clause, adverb clause and noun clause. And in this video, we will basically focus on main clause. So the main clause is also referred to as an independent clause or a principal clause. So now let us understand more about a main clause. A main clause is also referred to as an independent clause, or it can also be referred to as a principal clause. Okay, main clause is either referred to as an independent clause, it can also be called a principal clause. Main clause basically expresses the main idea, right? It expresses the main idea in a sentence. Now, just by cramming the definition, we can never understand the concept of clause. We will understand the concept better through examples. So now let us shift our focus to examples so that we can understand this in a deeply manner and we can have a clear concept of what actually clauses are. So first sentence can be: the girl was crying because she was hurt. Now the girl was crying is my clause. It has a subject, it has the predicate, it has a finite verb. That verb is action. Now remember that main clause, a main clause should have 2 things in it. First is the subject and second thing is the verb. If my main clause has a subject and a verb, Even if it does not has a predicate, doesn't matter. But if my main clause or if my clause has a subject and a verb, then that clause is referred to as a main clause. Over here, I have the subject. The subject over here is my girl. Remember that the subject will be contained in the action. The action is crying, right? My subject is contained in the action that the girl was crying. Here the subject is girl and the verb is described as an action. Another form of verb I can say is action. So subject is the girl, the action over here is crying. So the verb over here is crying. Since in my clause I am getting a subject and I am getting the verb, which means that this is my main clause. The girl was crying is the main clause. Another example of main clause can be, we should leave soon, otherwise we might get late. Now, we might get late over here is a clause. We over here is my subject and late over here is my verb. And in my clause, if I get a subject and a verb, which means that this clause is my main clause. Even over here, the girl was crying. I get girl as my subject, crying as my verb. I know that this is my main verb. I think it will be better through another example. Another example can be, my uncle lives in England, which is far away from India. I say my uncle lives in England. This is my clause. My uncle over here is the subject. Lives over here is my verb. If I get subject and verb in my clause, that clause becomes my main clause, because main clause usually expresses the main idea of the sentence. The main idea of the sentence is, I want to say that my uncle lives in England. This is the main idea of the sentence. Why I am using the sentence? I am making use of the sentence in order to indicate or in order to explain someone or to inform someone that my uncle lives in England. This is the main idea. The clause which defines the main idea is defined as the main clause. So, my clause contains subject and a verb. Therefore, this is my main clause, or it can be also considered as an independent clause. It is possible that the main clause can stand alone as a sentence. Stand alone as a sentence means that unlike phrase, if I remove the rest part of the sentence, even then a meaningful sentence can be formed. Like I say, the girl was crying. I leave this because she was hurt. I simply say the girl was crying. Makes a complete, meaningful sentence, right? I say, we might get late. Even if I do not tell the reason, if I say that make a sentence using late, and I make a sentence like we might get late, that is a meaningful sentence. Then I say, my uncle lives in England. A simple sentence, right? Where does your uncle live? My uncle lives in England. A simple sentence. So a clause, a main clause can stand alone without taking help of rest of the word or the remaining sentence. Now, there are possible cases where in a sentence there can be two main clauses. So we were discussing that there were two main, in a sentence there can be two main clauses. This can be understood better through examples. Like I said that the girl was crying. I say the girl was crying, and then I say and her mother was comforting her. The girl was crying, I said, was the main verb, right? Her mother was comforting her. Her mother is the subject. Comforting is the verb. Subject plus verb makes a main clause. So, here also I am getting a main clause, and even over here I am getting a main clause, which means that in a sentence there can be two main clauses. Another example can be, my uncle lives in England, but he sometimes visits India on business. My uncle lives in England. I already explained that this was the main clause. He sometimes visits India on business. He over here is my subject. Visit is my verb. Subject plus verb, if this is a clause, makes the main clause. So even in this sentence, there are two main clauses. So a sentence can have a single clause, single main clause. It can also have two main clause. Now, often children get confused, or people get confused with phrases and clause. But do not get confused, but focus on the concept. Now, there are many differences between phrases and clause. The first difference is that a phrase will never contain a subject and a predicate, but a clause will. So, the difference is between a phrase and a clause. First difference is that in phrase there is no subject, there is no predicate. There is no subject in phrase, there is no predicate in phrase, but a clause will contain a subject and a predicate. So this is the first difference between a phrase and a clause. Like I said, that the girl over here is a subject. Was crying, I can say, is my predicate. And the predicate is containing the verb. Next is, a phrase contains no verb. Exception can be when I am talking about a verb phrase. But leaving the verb phrase, a phrase will never contain a verb, but a clause will always contain a verb. A clause is incomplete without a verb. If there is no verb, then I cannot say that that group of word is a clause. So, next is that it contains verb. See, even over here I say he lives in England, visits India, comforting, crying. All these are the verbs. A clause cannot be completed. We cannot say that the set of words is a clause until and unless it contains a verb in it. So the third First is there is no subject, no predicate. Second is there is no verb in a phrase. And second is that alone it cannot make a sentence. Right? If I just use a phrase like I say, bag is very beautiful. When I say bag is very beautiful over here is my phrase. But if I leave bag and I say very beautiful, my sentence is wrong. But when I say my uncle lives in England, this is a clause. And I say that my clause is also making a complete sentence. So a clause can make a complete sentence. So if we keep in mind the differences between the two phrases and clause, we will never get confused between the two. In this video, we particularly focused on clauses and the type of clause which is the main clause. We also discussed that in a sentence there can be more than one main clause. A main clause will always consist of a subject and a verb. Then we implemented various examples of main clause to understand them better and to get a clear concept of the first type of clause, which is main clause.